The heavens and the earth were founded upon the five elements, and all things come to life through the Qi. Across 21 continents, this is a world where cultivation is achieved by harnessing the spiritual energy of the heavens and the earth. There are many paths, with countless sects scattered like stars in the sky. However, for thousands of years, only the northern Sword Sect stood out, proudly leading all others. The story begins in the white marble plaza of the Sword Sect. A crowd had gathered while someone shouted the names of the stages that were about to commence. A young cultivator was giving his all to demonstrate the spiritual energy he had accumulated over the past years. But somehow, he could not manifest it. A man announced that Xiao Nan, from the city of Nanli in the north, was at the third stage of spiritual energy. The crowd began to whisper, mocking poor Xiao Nan, known as the one who never gets past the third stage. Meanwhile, some people were sitting at the edge of a cliff. A blonde-haired girl showed interest upon hearing Xiao Nan's name. Another girl commented that he was in the third stage and added that she had heard his parents had disappeared long ago. For that reason, he was not welcome in the Zhao family. Someone asked how that boy managed to enter the sect, and a third girl remarked that Xiao Nan was rejected by the world. The Grand Elder of the Sword Sect, Yu Bingyun, was also present. She remarked that sometimes, what someone seeks the most appears when least expected. Another elder of the sect, Mo Li, said that the one foretold in the unreliable prophecy of the central ancestor Su had finally appeared. The third elder, Jingxiu, confirmed, saying that this person had indeed emerged. Next to Jingxiu, the sect's vice leader, Wu Yan, listened silently. Jingxiu then remarked that once the sect's formation was activated, no one would be able to stop it, and that boy, Xiao Nan, would be completely absorbed. Bingyun declared that the ancestor's prophecy never failed, and that it was the last one he left before ascending. Now that the person had appeared, they had no reason to let him go. Bingyun then ordered the others to join her in activating the sect's protective formation. The four women raised their hands to the sky and released a beam of energy. At that moment, a massive ray of light burst from the clouds and struck a statue in the center of the sect's plaza. From the statue, a beam of light struck Xiao Nan directly. An intense energy surged through Xiao Nan's body. He realized his soul had left his body and wondered if he had died. However, his body was still lying before the statue, emanating a strong spiritual energy. The disciples around him panicked and asked the elder if Xiao Nan was still alive. The elder replied that not even high-level masters could escape unscathed from the sect's grand protective formation. Xiao Nan began to scream, releasing even more energy, and then returned to his body, completely unharmed. The disciples, terrified, began to flee in a panic, thinking the young man had turned into an undead, leaving Xiao Nan utterly confused. Meanwhile, Bingyun watched the scene from a distance. She grew excited upon confirming that Xiao Nan was indeed the destined one. As the eldest sister, she felt responsible for guiding him down the right path and asked that no one interfere with him. Mo Li approached and said that the young man was the pillar of the Sword Sect, then questioned why Bingyun wanted him solely for herself. Jingxiu appeared, complaining that she still didn't have a successor, and since their sect followed the path of alchemy, turning Xiao Nan into a furnace wouldn't make her shameless. Thus, the three girls entered a direct dispute over who would get Xiao Nan. Suddenly an attack came, striking the center of the group. It was a large sword covered in ice. Wu Yan had thrown it to put an end to the quarrel. She declared that she would bring Xiao Nan to Bujian Peak to study the Sword Codex with her. Mo Li responded that if the second eldest sister intended to take Xiao Nan by force, then she would not act politely either. Wu Yan challenged her to try. Observing the situation, Jingxiu believed that if the two joined forces, they might be able to win. So she decided to take advantage of the fight between them for her own benefit. Seeing that neither of the elders would back down and foreseeing an ugly fight, Vice Leader Bingyun asked them to stop the quarrel immediately. She then suggested that they conceal their identities and approach Xiao Nan, letting him choose where he wanted to go. Jingxiu and Mo Li quickly accepted the proposal and asked what Wu Yan thought of it. Wu Yan then flew off swiftly and said that the idea was acceptable. Some time had passed, and night had fallen. In the cave of the newly admitted disciple of Jianzong, Xiao Nan was enjoying the hot springs of an internal spring in his dormitory. He remembered what his superior had said, that he was very lucky. However, something must have happened to the sect's protective formation, and that was why Xiao Nan was still alive. At that moment, the protagonist reflected that he was traveling through time, and no matter how powerful the sect's protective formation was, it couldn't simply let him go as soon as he appeared. Remembering his past, he began to miss his parents and recalled how his life had been up to that point. Then, Xiao Nan stood up and said that this damned body couldn't maintain his cultivation level. Even though he absorbed all the energy, the next day, he would always return to the same stage. He went on to say that, after being there for so long, he believed that the ring should be something special, his only relic. But it had turned out to be a useless artifact. So, Xiao Nan tried to remove the ring from his finger, and suddenly, several system tabs appeared around him, detecting that the host's soul did not belong to that world, and that a curse was underway. The protagonist was startled to see a system suddenly appear. The curse was activated, and he began to lose aura points consecutively, leaving Xiao Nan completely desperate. Sometime later, the protagonist sat in boredom, thinking that it was because of that curse that he couldn't level up. He decided to lie down and wondered what the purpose of all that training was. At that moment, the door to his dormitory began to open. The protagonist slightly raised his head to see who it was. Bing Yun entered the room, and the protagonist wondered who this woman was, entering his room in the middle of the night. Bing Yun approached him and his little friend, saying she would use them to test a technique. The protagonist, startled, wondered if she had noticed him during the ceremony earlier, and was now taking advantage of the night to get close. Bing Yun mentioned that a few years ago she had acquired a technique to invade dreams, and that, depending on the strength of the one who cast it, it was possible to alter the subconscious of the one being manipulated. With that power, she believed she could win over Xiao Yun and, with that, reach the top of the sect. However, she realized that, for some reason, the technique wasn't working on the protagonist. She then increased the power of the casting even further. Completely overwhelmed by that energy, the protagonist wondered if the woman was trying to kill him. Suddenly, a system message appeared, warning that he was suffering severe mental damage. Strangely, this left him confused because, upon receiving severe mental damage, his mental level increased. His body began to react, reabsorbing all of the energy, and with that, the protagonist realized that there was a bug in that technique. Thus, the protagonist surrendered and allowed Bing Yun to complete her technique, as he believed that, due to the system, this technique seemed beneficial to him. In his dreams, the protagonist saw Bing Yun calling him Master, and she appeared to be enchanting. Faced with that wonderful vision, he felt very happy with this pleasant aspect of the system. He was so excited that he wanted much more than that. So, Xiao Nan decided to get up and embrace his dreams, literally. He thought he was about to engage in dual cultivation, which would help improve his body. With that in mind, Xiao Nan moved even closer to Bing Yun, who looked at the protagonist's handsome face and thought he wasn't that bad after all. But Bing Yun quickly came to her senses and refused to go on, striking the protagonist directly and becoming irritated. Seeing him collapsed, she wondered what had happened, as that boy was now absorbing her spiritual energy. She immediately stepped back and said she had managed to escape just in time. Otherwise, she would have been completely drained by that boy. Xiao Nan stood up, holding his head and saying it hurt a little. Bing Yun was startled to see that the protagonist had already woken up, as she had never seen someone so unusual. She quickly placed her hand on the protagonist's face, staring at him directly, trying to understand what had happened. Xiao Nan, pretending, pushed Bing Yun away and asked who she was. However, the woman approached him again, even more intrigued by Xiao Nan, who backed away quickly, saying he was a good man and didn't sell his body. Bing Yun then introduced herself, saying she was an inner disciple of the first peak of the Sword Sect, and added that she had seen the protagonist during the test that had taken place earlier. The protagonist backed away even more and remarked that there had been many new disciples around that day, and yet the senior sister wanted to give him special attention. Then he asked if she was trying to engage in dual cultivation with him. Irritated, Bing Yun replied that he was the only one among all the newcomers who had reached the third stage of spiritual energy, so of course she remembered him easily. With that additional damage, the protagonist gained a few more points and realized the pattern was repeating once again. Bing Yun explained that the master of Hongchen Peak had personally sent her to look after the protagonist, as the master was concerned about what might happen to Xiao Nan. However, the protagonist interrupted her and asked her to hit him again. He believed that if he took more damage, he might receive additional benefits, and he needed to test that theory. If it worked, it would be a miracle in his life. So once again, Xiao Nan asked Bing Yun to strike him. He even got up and ran toward her, and she hit him directly, yelling at him to stay away. Once again, the system message appeared, announcing more gains. Bing Yun was stunned by what she had just witnessed. The protagonist seemed to have a different aura. He grabbed her foot and said she didn't need to worry. He didn't have smelly feet. Then he let go of the girl's foot. Xiao Nan was very pleased with his discovery and thought it was amazing. Meanwhile, Bing Yun thought that the one chosen by destiny seemed, in reality, like a pervert. But Bing Yun decided to give Xiao Nan a manual that contained everything a cultivator should keep in mind. She warned that if the protagonist followed the book properly, he would make rapid progress. Xiao Nan took the book in his hands and quickly opened it to see what was inside. Upon reading the title, Qi Refinement in 3 Years, the protagonist asked if there was one about foundation building in 5 years. Bing Yun asked how Xiao Nan knew about that. Then she became excited and said she wouldn't waste any more time. She stated that that very night they would cultivate according to the manual. Sometime later, Xiao Nan was cultivating intensely. The system announced that he was receiving spiritual energy points, and he realized it wasn't such a bad deal. Bing Yun scolded the protagonist again, asking if he thought she was stupid, as the energy flow around him hadn't changed at all. He was merely pretending to practice something. So, the protagonist restarted his practice, inhaling deeply and exhaling. But at that moment, he began to lose spiritual energy rapidly. He remembered that cultivating diligently would only make things worse. Bing Yun commented that Xiao Nan didn't need to worry, as the elder sister would accompany him all night long. At that moment, Jin Shu knocks on the protagonist's bedroom door. She calls for Xiao Nan from outside while Bing Yun and the protagonist remain confused inside the room. Quickly, Bing Yun runs toward Xiao Nan, covering his mouth with her hand and asking him to stay silent. With this sudden approach, the protagonist gains a few more status points. Jin Shu, still outside, says she is the chief disciple of Elder Yao Feng, the first peak of the Sword Sect. The elder learned that the younger brother's cultivation had stagnated, so he sent her to bring some pills to Xiao Nan. Bing Yun continues to cover the protagonist's mouth, and the two look anxiously at the door, until she moves away from him, still asking for silence, and runs to the wardrobe, asking Xiao Nan not to tell anyone she was there. At that moment, Yunqiu enters the room. Seeing the protagonist's condition, she asks if he was practicing late. Xiao Nan asks why his older sister came to his room so late at night. Seeing that the protagonist was a bit anxious, Jin Shu believes he was nervous about her presence there, and, therefore truly deserves to be the son of destiny. Then, she approaches the protagonist, saying she brought a pill to quickly improve his cultivation. She shows the beautiful, rare golden pill in her hand. Jin Shu imagines the protagonist completely at her feet after this act of benevolence. Xiao Nan, seeing Jin Shu daydreaming, wonders if he woke up in a nest of strange women. At that moment, Jin Shu makes a quick move toward Xiao Nan, grabs him, and asks him to open his mouth and take the pill, but the protagonist slaps her hand, causing the pill to fall, being thrown far away from both of them. Xiao Nan apologizes for dropping his sister's precious pill. Then, Jin Shu stands up and crushes the pill underfoot, destroying it completely. She explains that when these medicines suffer external pressure, they change their properties and turn into poison. The protagonist, upon hearing this, quickly perks up, thinking of recent discoveries. Maybe this will actually benefit him. Jin Shu quickly approaches, saying it's a pity, but it doesn't matter much because she brought many pills for Xiao Nan. She then asks the protagonist to be good, because after taking these pills, he will become a disciple of Yao Feng. However, Xiao Nan desperately asks his older sister to wait a minute. Bing Yun, who was inside the wardrobe, watched everything that happened in the room. She thinks Jin Shu is a very clever girl, as she is trying to bribe Xiao Nan with pills. Then her nail accidentally hits the wardrobe door, and with that, Jin Shu asks what that noise was. The protagonist asks if the older sister heard correctly, as he didn't hear anything. Jin Shu, ignoring him, places her hand on his shoulder, moves him aside, and tells Xiao Nan not to worry, because she will protect him. Then, Jin Shu places her hand on the wardrobe door. She was close to finding Bing Yun. Xiao Nan finds a pill on the floor, and asks Jin Shu if that medicine really changes properties depending on who touches it. The protagonist then brings the pill to his mouth, and Jin Shu panics, begging Xiao Nan to stop, but it's too late. He had already swallowed the poisonous pill. Suddenly, a huge surge of energy begins to flood the protagonist's body. The system appears, announcing that he has received many status points. Xiao Nan becomes very excited, as what he suspected turned out to be true. The poisonous pill acted as a supplement for him, and with just one, he managed to advance. Jin Shu is startled, and thinks that if he could evolve with a poisonous pill, then a normal pill would have an even greater effect. Bing Yun is also surprised to recognize the sacred body for cultivation. Both of them become even more excited, determined to compete with all their might for the attention of the beloved protagonist. But suddenly, another girl appears, knocking on the door and asking if that was Xiao Nan's room. Jin Shu recognizes the voice. It was Sister Wu Yan. She hadn't imagined Wu Yan would take such a step. Xiao Nan approaches the girl and comments that it seems yet another girl is coming. Jin Shu asks what he meant by another girl. The protagonist is completely unsure of what to say. Then Jin Shu turns once again toward the wardrobe, wanting to see what was inside, and tells the protagonist not to let anyone know she was there. She then enters the wardrobe. Xiao Nan turns around, sighs, and says that it's fine. They know how to take care of themselves. Meanwhile, inside the wardrobe, Bing Yun and Jin Shu meet. Outside, the protagonist opens the door of his dormitory. Upon seeing that beautiful silhouette with a cold elegance, Xiao Nan asks what the older sister wants. Wu Yan turns at that moment, and realizes that the protagonist had leveled up in just one night. Standing before that mysterious woman, Xiao Nan wonders if she came to help him advance in his training. He asks if Wu Yan also came on someone's orders to assist him. Wu Yan simply replies that she came to remind him to complete his class assignments. The protagonist then remembers that this was the day the disciples would be assigned to their classes and dormitories. He thanks Wu Yan for the reminder. The next day, an elder attempts to make an announcement. He begins by explaining that the Sword Sect is divided into 4 classes: Herb, Garland, Jibo, and Prodigy. The level of instruction varies depending on the class. The elder also explains that a wooden puppet will be used to evaluate their test, and that if someone can survive for the time equivalent to half a stick of incense, they will be admitted to the Garland class. The newly arrived disciples grow excited, eager to find a class quickly. The protagonist arrives at the location, extremely tired, thinking it was because of those 2 crazy women who didn't let him sleep all night. A man named Qian Duo approaches and starts mocking the protagonist, saying that Xiao Nan is the weakest among all the new disciples. The protagonist observes the young man and thinks he is at stage 10 of spiritual energy, about to advance. That guy was practically a prodigy. At that moment, a system message alerts that the protagonist is receiving psychological damage. Seeing that this could be profitable, he decides to pick a fight with Qian Duo. Once again, Xiao Nan begins to accumulate psychological damage points. Internally, the protagonist is thrilled by this great opportunity. The other disciples approach Qian Duo and whisper that the protagonist must have a screw loose, since he seems to be enjoying the situation. A man named Jibo Mei Yang asks if Qian Duo and the others are unaware of the sect's rules, as the sect treats everyone equally, regardless of their origins. The disciples begin to comment that Mei Yang is from the renowned Jibo family and possesses an innate pure yang constitution, with unparalleled talent. Mei Yang places a hand on the protagonist's shoulder and says that Brother Xiao may be a complete good-for-nothing, but doesn't deserve to be ridiculed by everyone. At that moment, the protagonist loses a few inspiration points. The man continues talking as if he were a knight defending the weak and oppressed, while the protagonist thinks he is clearly overdoing it. Mei Yang then says that if he were at stage 3 of spiritual energy, he would find a tree and a rope to end his own suffering. The protagonist then realizes that this guy is actually a wolf in sheep's clothing. However, with this disguised insult, the protagonist gains a lot of points, which excites him. He places his hand on Mei Yong's shoulder and thanks him for everything, leaving the young man confused by this gesture. Everyone around is equally confused, since Mei Yong had just ridiculed him. Meanwhile, Wu Yan is perched in a tree a little distance away, watching everything from afar. She is impressed to see that even with so much criticism, Xiao Nan remains unfazed. With such determination, she concludes that he must have a great destiny, and for that reason, she needs to recruit him quickly to her peak. Suddenly the elder announces that the evaluation is about to begin, and the protagonist is the first to be called. He steps in front of the test dummy and announces the beginning of his evaluation. Wu Yan is quite interested in seeing Xiao Nan's full potential. Thus, the protagonist charges at the dummy and lands a sword strike with all his strength. The dummy activates at that moment and responds with a matching blow, sending Xiao Nan flying far away. Wu Yan sighs in disappointment and wonders if the protagonist's cultivation is really that low. The disciples watching the scene begin to comment that Xiao Nan lost with just one strike. The protagonist gets up and wonders why it doesn't hurt as much as he imagined. He also receives a few decent status points. Xiao Nan realizes that as long as he isn't eliminated outright, he will increase his attributes when struck. Excited, he sees that the dummy is perfect for his development. This sudden attitude catches Wu Yan's attention. He gets up and heads back to the center once more, placing himself in front of the test dummy again. A bit more confident, Xiao Nan charges in. The fight between the two was intense, but it was still possible to follow their movements. Although the protagonist was hit more times, he kept gaining points and thus advanced further. The people watching the test were impressed by how long Xiao Nan was able to hold out. The protagonist paused for a moment. His clothes were torn, and there were some injuries on his body, but he remained holding his sword. The test dummy gave Xiao Nan no room and was already upon him, ready to strike. However, Xiao Nan used his sword to block the consecutive attacks. The protagonist thought he wouldn't be able to break that test dummy, but also wouldn't be defeated. If he maintained the fight at that level, he could gain a lot of cultivation experience. Suddenly, the test dummy managed to break Xiao Nan's sword. The people watching the test began cheering for the protagonist, telling him to hold on and stay strong. Even with his sword broken, the protagonist threw the remaining half he was still holding. The dummy dodged the blade, but Xiao Nan seized the opportunity to advance, shouting that he would show his fist the size of a clay pot. Xiao Nan landed several consecutive blows on the test dummy. A system message appeared, informing that the host Xiao Nan's endure level had reached level 8. However, the dummy raised one of its hands and landed a direct hit on Xiao Nan. Despite being defeated, the protagonist earned many points, and could only think that this creature was a great cultivation farm. To him, fighting the test dummy was incredible. The dummy fell to its knees. The elder, upon seeing that scene, thought the protagonist was amazing and wondered how powerful he would become if he continued growing at that pace. Suddenly, a wooden bird appeared above the dummy's head, screaming Xiao Nan's name and beginning to stutter. The surrounding disciples were startled and wondered which school Xiao Nan would be assigned to. The bird kept stuttering and screaming wildly. The sound was so loud that it formed a massive sound wave around the test center. Then, a bright light shone from the top of the 4 peaks of the sect. The elder was in shock. It had been many years since an unmatched prodigy had appeared and been acknowledged by all 4 peaks at once. The dummy then announced that Xiao Nan would receive a special admission to the Academy of Prodigies. People began whispering that Xiao Nan was now on the same level as brother Mei Yong. The elder helped the protagonist to his feet, thinking that Xiao Nan had the greatest perseverance he had seen in years. That's why it was no surprise the 4 peaks had recognized him. The man placed his hand on the protagonist and began to heal him, transferring a bit of spiritual energy. However, by doing this, the protagonist ended up losing a lot of spiritual energy points. Xiao Nan stepped back a little and explained that his physique was a bit different, and because of that, he needed to recover on his own. The old man looked at the protagonist, moved, and thought he had once heard about hidden physiques that only revealed themselves when one's cultivation reached a certain level. Thus, the protagonist stood up to leave the center of the test arena, but something caught his attention. All the disciples seemed happy, and were celebrating Xiao Nan's achievements. He was surrounded by beautiful maidens and wondered if he had overdone things that day, as he still didn't fully understand how the system worked. At the moment, he needed to lead a more discreet life. Then, Xiao Nan told everyone that he had been very lucky that day, and that because he was weak, the test dummy hadn't unleashed its full strength. That was why he had managed to balance the fight. One of the girls asked if the test dummy adjusted itself based on the opponent's strength. The protagonist, slightly embarrassed, said that you could say so. The girl continued, saying that the phenomenon of the 4 peaks wasn't something just anyone could trigger. The protagonist tried to appear humble and started making up that it only happened because he was the weakest there, and that the Sword Sect wanted to use him as an example to show that all disciples were treated equally, and that even those with little potential would have their efforts recognized. The protagonist then asked the elder if he agreed with that. The elder tried to say something, but Xiao Nan looked at him intently. Then, the elder agreed with the protagonist and said Xiao Nan was absolutely right. The protagonist felt a bit more relieved at that moment, while the old elder looked at him, thinking that Xiao Nan was so young yet already understood the importance of hiding his abilities. With eyes full of tears, the elder was filled with pride for the protagonist. Suddenly, Qianduo approached and asked if the protagonist was from that small town called Wu. If so, he also asked if Xiao Nan would like to become his follower. The protagonist was very confused by the sudden proposal and suggested they make a bet. Xiao Nan said that if Qianduo lasted longer than he did against the test dummy, then he would agree to become Qianduo's follower. Mei Yong looked at the protagonist with disdain, and then Xiao Nan asked if he also wanted to take part in the bet. Mei Yong replied that human cultivators were at a disadvantage, and that what mattered to him was leading his fellow cultivators to glory. He finished by saying that the protagonist and Qianduo had no ambition. The protagonist then turned to Qianduo and asked if he would accept the challenge or not. Qianduo agreed and said he would never lose to someone like Xiao Nan. Some time later, Qianduo was being defeated by the test dummy. The protagonist approached him and asked if he was okay, though in his mind, he thought those guys were fools and would never be able to endure attacks like he could. All the disciples were struggling greatly, including the prodigy Mei Yong, who stated that a mere test proved nothing, and that only with true cultivation talent could one truly stand out. The people nearby began to criticize the protagonist and praise the young master Mei Yong, but the protagonist was gaining many points because of it. Then, the elder announced that everyone had worked hard, opened a portal, and asked them to follow him to Moon Peak, where he would assign their residences. Upon crossing the portal, the disciples arrived at the place where they would be staying. A glowing tree held up islands around it. Mei Yong asked if he could learn about the origin of that golden spiritual tree. He also asked whether the tree had any connection to the residences. The elder explained that all the spiritual energy of Moon Peak was connected to the golden spiritual tree, and the closer a residence was to it, the richer in energy it would be. The protagonist then asked whether living inside the tree would be even better. The elder agreed with Xiao Nan and added that the tree had been hiding a secret for many years and had remained without a master for 500 years. The protagonist considered asking the system not to place him near that tree, as he didn't want anything interfering with his cultivation. Qianduo approached him and said not to worry, because a place like that would never be given to someone like him. Then, the elder announced that he would begin the allocation and asked each person called to step forward. Suddenly, one of the leaves detached from the golden tree and floated toward Xiao Nan. The elder turned and said he had expected that from a disciple chosen by the 4 peaks. The slumbering sacred tree had opened its doors to him. Xiao Nan tried to catch the golden leaf. The elder explained that it was the key to unlocking the golden spirit tree, and confirmed that Xiao Nan would be its new master. The disciples around them were ecstatic to witness such an extraordinary achievement. The elder asked why Xiao Nan was still standing there. Xiao Nan replied that he had very humble talent, and that such a valuable residence should go to someone more gifted. The elder said he appreciated the protagonist's humility, but since the tree itself had chosen him, there was no reason to refuse. He told the protagonist not to worry, because the sect held monthly tests, and if in 9 years he failed to reach the 9th level of spiritual energy, he would be expelled from the sect. He concluded by saying that, as long as the protagonist trained hard, there was still a chance for him to enter the Prodigy Academy and benefit from its resources. Qian Duo agreed, and said that if Xiao Nan were expelled within a year, all of his current glory would become nothing but gossip. The protagonist tried to think of a way to improve, but this supposed paradise he had just found was nothing more than a poisonous den for him. Mei Yong asked the elder what the training would be like from now on, or if they would just stay in their residences. The elder replied that the sect tokens revealed all the secret realms the disciples could access. They just had to follow the ones related to their strengths. However, the elder warned that some places were dangerous, and told everyone not to risk their lives unnecessarily. Upon hearing this, the protagonist became excited. After all, a powerful place could bring many benefits to his cultivation system. Some time passed, and the elder said it was getting late, and asked everyone to head to their residences. A few minutes later, at the Golden Spirit Tree, the protagonist was lying in his dormitory. He thought about everything that had happened that day and felt like it was all a grand display of luxury. He wondered why he felt as though everything had been orchestrated by someone. Suddenly, the protagonist felt a strange sensation, as if he were being watched. And indeed, he was being watched. Jinshu asked Bing Yun if her crystal ball was really working, since Xiao Nan had noticed them. Bing Yun said she hadn't expected the protagonist's spiritual perception to be so sharp. She added that maybe the two of them should observe Xiao Nan more closely to assess his potential later that night. The protagonist jumped out of bed quickly, but believed that, after experiencing so much during the day, he was probably just being paranoid. He then decided to check his system status. After reviewing his information, Xiao Nan thought that although his physical condition had improved slightly over the last few days, if he wanted to pass next month's evaluation, he would need to train hard. So, he decided to use the sects token to see if there were any secret realms suitable for him. After a few minutes of searching, Xiao Nan found a hidden realm filled with lava and countless buried treasures. The place was extremely dangerous for a cultivator's body. Finally, the protagonist had found a realm that seemed made for him. Xiao Nan then got up and decided to check out the place, since he couldn't sleep. Meanwhile, the girls were feeling bored while watching the protagonist. Bing Yun started to get up and said she was going to sleep for the night, but Jin Shu pointed at the crystal ball and said that Xiao Nan was with the younger sister. Bing Yun panicked and tried to see how Mo Li and Xiao Nan had ended up together. Somewhere within the Sword Sect, Mo Li was in a clear lake, and the protagonist was watching her from afar. He had only wanted to splash water on his face to wake up a bit, and now he was faced with such an emotional scene. Seeing Mo Li, the protagonist wondered if he was dreaming. Embarrassed, Xiao Nan tried to say he didn't know anyone was there. Suddenly, Mo Li tossed a gourd of water toward him, and said that she saw Xiao Nan's lips were dry, so she assumed he must be thirsty too. The protagonist, confused, thought to himself that this girl wasn't yelling at him angrily, which he found very unexpected. He then drank a little of the liquid from the gourd. A breath of fire escaped his mouth, and he said the water was really strong. Mo Li replied that it wasn't bad at all and, smiling, said she liked Xiao Nan. She came closer and said that someone who could drink such strong water so boldly at such a young age was quite rare. Mo Li made the protagonist sit on the ground. Nervous, Xiao Nan said that the elder sister's water smelled very nice and was hard to resist, but then he turned away and explained that he had a low tolerance for that kind of drink. Suddenly, Mo Li said her head was starting to spin, and she collapsed on top of Xiao Nan. Desperate, he told the elder sister that she should return to her residence early. Mo Li said she was feeling very cold now, and asked if Xiao Nan could help her warm up. The protagonist tried to say something, but Mo Li whispered in his ear, telling him that he had a great opportunity right in front of him. So why not take it? Mo Li was thinking at that moment that she had planned all of this ever since Xiao Nan walked out the door. Meanwhile, Bing Yun and Jin Shu were watching everything unfold. Xiao Nan handed the water gourd back and said that if the elder sister was cold, she could drink a bit more to warm up. Mo Li tossed the gourd aside. She hadn't imagined the protagonist would have such strong self-control. Mo Li then sat down and asked what Xiao Nan was doing in such a distant place, considering he was just a novice disciple. Xiao Nan explained that he had come to explore the secret realm of the Flame Prison, but hadn't yet found the entrance. Mo Li said it was extremely dangerous inside, and that with his current level, he was basically walking towards certain death. Xiao Nan simply replied that he was aware of that. The three elders wondered at that moment if the protagonist had gone mad. Suddenly, some system messages appeared, stating that the host had received a few silent contempt points. Xiao Nan found it odd, since normally when people mocked him, he only received 5 or 6 points. Mo Li stood up and said that realm wasn't meant for someone at the protagonist's level, and that he should go back and rest now. But Xiao Nan grabbed Mo Li's hand and said that the night was still long, then asked if she'd like to continue their conversation more deeply. Mo Li asked what exactly Xiao Nan was trying to do. Xiao Nan asked if Mo Li could feel that. Mo Li asked what he meant, and the protagonist quickly turned and said that his poor heart was burning with anticipation for the rise of the Sword Sect, and that this desire was blazing within him. Mo Li replied that it was rare to see a rookie so enthusiastic, then pointed in a direction and said the cave was over there. At that moment, the protagonist wondered if his sincerity had touched such a pleasant young lady, but Mo Li patted him on the shoulder a few times and told him not to worry, as she would take care of the burial. Xiao Nan simply replied that it wouldn't be necessary. He then flew off quickly, thinking that he would first change clothes before entering the blazing cave, and afterward, investigate the background of this elder sister. Mo Li tossed an object toward him. It was a small golden gourd. Watching from afar, she smiled brightly. Sometime later, Xiao Nan arrived at the entrance to the blazing cave, where a few disciples were coming out, looking somewhat weakened. Seeing this, Xiao Nan realized how dangerous the place truly was, which made him rush even faster into the cave. Xiao Nan passed through the entrance gate and found himself in a completely desolate place, covered in lava and blazing fire. Flames began to wrap around his body, and he realized the place could serve as a kind of supplement for his unique cultivation. Several system messages appeared, indicating that Xiao Nan was gaining status points. Meanwhile, some disciples were watching him from a distance and asked if he was okay. But Xiao Nan, full of excitement, responded that he was feeling great, which left the others very confused. They decided to leave him there, thinking that once he couldn't handle it anymore, he would either crawl out or ask an elder for help. Before leaving, however, a female disciple handed him a fire orb and said the item would help him measure the concentration of fire poison in the area. She explained that if the orb turned yellow, he should leave immediately and avoid the area, as the poison would be highly concentrated. The protagonist quickly thanked the girl for her kindness, but she decided to help him a bit more. However, upon doing so, the protagonist suddenly lost a large number of status points. The young woman tried to explain that the technique she used could temporarily boost resistance to fire poison. She added that she couldn't bear to see him eliminated at such a young age, and said he didn't need to thank her. Then, she quickly left and rejoined the other disciples. Despite the setback, the protagonist remained positive, thinking he had gained something useful to help him find the best spots. Xiao Nan then threw the orb and quickly followed it, searching for the most poisonous place in the area. A few minutes later, the orb led the protagonist to the entrance of a tunnel. It glowed brightly in front of the suspicious opening. Without hesitation, he decided to keep following it, until he came across something, a huge iron gate. Xiao Nan opened the gate without delay, but was startled to find an ancient disciple's corpse, someone who likely couldn't withstand the poison of that place. The sight gave the protagonist quite a scare. Looking further into the room, Xiao Nan spotted a chest. He couldn't tell if the other disciple had been killed by the poison or by the chest itself, but he commented that, thanks to the system, what was bad for others could be great for him. When he opened the chest, a massive wave of poison was released. The poison was so powerful it filled the entire room. Yet Xiao Nan felt comfortable within all that corrosive energy. Then, as he looked inside the chest, he spotted a glowing item and immediately reached for it, even while being completely engulfed in poison. The moment Xiao Nan grabbed the item, he took severe damage, which caused him to receive a large number of points. Looking at the stone, the protagonist realized he'd earned so many points at once that he considered it a miraculous treasure. But then something happened. The protagonist felt that his body wasn't responding as it should. Xiao Nan asked himself what was going on. Fatal damage warning messages from the system kept appearing one after another, and the spiritual fire energy was also overtaking Xiao Nan's body. At that moment, He thought this wasn't good at all. The benefits brought by the curse system were coming like an avalanche, completely exceeding what his body could withstand. He quickly threw the stone back into the chest and closed it in an attempt to stop the poison from spreading further. But after doing that, the system messages showed that the protagonist was earning only a few points. Xiao Nan realized that the stone had improved his physique, but also weakened the beneficial effects of the fire energy in the air. Looking at the chest, Xiao Nan remembered that he had classes in the morning and couldn't stay up all night, so he decided to return another time. Some time passed, and the protagonist had already left the blazing cave. He was back in the valley when he noticed the small gourd hanging from his waist. Then, he saw Mo Li waiting for him in the distance. Mo Li smiled and said she had been waiting, and asked him to hurry up and take off his clothes. Xiao Nan commented that they had just met and asked if that wasn't a bit weird. Mo Li replied for him not to think silly things, as the blazing cave was full of fire. She just wanted to do a routine check. Xiao Nan then showed her that he didn't have a single scratch from the cave. Mo Li approached him and thought that not only had he come out unscathed, but he also seemed to have fused with the fire, and she found that very strange. As she passed her hand over Xiao Nan, she realized that he truly was the child chosen by fate, as his physique was extraordinary. Watching Mo Li, Xiao Nan wondered what this woman was up to. Everything she did seemed off. So he pushed her away. She asked what he was doing, and Xiao Nan asked who she really was. Mo Li got nervous, worried she might have been found out. Xiao Nan picked up the small gourd and said Mo Li must have put that thing on him earlier at the hot spring. He asked if she had been spying on him. Mo Li tried to explain that she was worried about Xiao Nan, and that's why she placed a fragment of her soul inside the gourd to protect him, so she could ensure nothing unexpected would happen. Xiao Nan started playing with the gourd and asked if she was really being honest, or if it had been to watch him. Meanwhile, Mo Li felt a surge of electricity run through her entire body. Xiao Nan asked if she was feeling okay. She said she was fine and asked for the gourd back, but Xiao Nan didn't give it to her and kept playing with it, making Mo Li react again. She begged him to stop doing that. The protagonist asked Mo Li to be honest and tell him what her real intentions were with him. Mo Li sat down and said, "All right," admitting she no longer had the strength to argue. She asked Xiao Nan to come closer, and as she began to speak, she suddenly threw herself onto him and said she was actually his martial grandmother. She asked if that brat still wanted to play around, and Xiao Nan immediately refused. Mo Li took the gourd back and told him to stop pretending, saying what she had done was nothing serious. She walked away, saying she had class in the morning, and told Xiao Nan to return to his dormitory quickly. Xiao Nan got up and said that this senior sister had impressive strength. The next morning, in the Hall of Prodigies at the Sword Sect, Xiao Nan sat through the morning class, very sleepy. Instructor Niu welcomed the new disciples and said he would be one of the supervisors for this month's exam. He began his lecture, but soon noticed Xiao Nan sleeping, and asked if the protagonist had a problem with his teaching methods. Xiao Nan denied it, and said everything was great, asking Instructor Niu to continue. Qianduo took the opportunity to call the protagonist trash, and accused him of sleeping in class just because the Hall of Prodigies had accepted his admission. Instructor Niu agreed, and said he would show Xiao Nan the true place of a lazy disciple like him. We'll continue in the next episode. For more videos like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. See you next time.